Hello, everybody. Let's talk about literary analysis. Obviously, there are countless approaches for analyzing literature. To make it a bit simpler in this class, we're going to focus on one prevalent approach called postcolonial theory, or POCO theory for short. This approach was chosen for two reasons. First, it gives us a chance to put all of our readings into a conversation with each other. The stories we'll look at will range from 2000 BCE to 2000 CE, with vast differences in immediate historical and social context. But we can use postcolonial theory as a common thread to compare and contrast them. Second, postcolonial theory is an incredibly meaty approach. It doesn't have a single rinse repeat method, but instead it offers several themes and questions to help explore a piece of literature. And that means we can enjoy a variety of topics while still being part of the same general conversation. I lost my mouse, hold on. So postcolonial theory originated in the late 1970s. The writers and philosophers had been discussing the concepts well before that. Scholars generally regard the book Orientalism by Edward Said as the seminal text for POCO theory. This is going to get a bit theory heavy, but it's going to all make sense later. So one overarching goal of postcolonial theory is to investigate the historical context of a work of literature and to see how the literature reflects its time period. To get more specific with time periods, postcolonial theory is concerned with literature that relates to the colonial era. This is a time when European countries were expanding and setting up colonies across other continents. Think of how Britain colonized India or how Portugal colonized Brazil. Theorists tried to investigate the effects of colonization on the cultures of the indigenous people, as well as the cultures of the colonial powers. So, what can literature teach us about the process of colonization? About what it makes people think, how it makes people feel, and what happens when people gain independence? Now, back to Edward Said. In the book Orientalism, Said explores how colonial powers have treated the cultures and peoples and religions they're colonizing. We can think of these colonial powers as the West. Said writes about the idea of the other, pointing out that traditional Western thought divides the world into the West, us, and East, the other. In making this division, Said argues that the West lumps anybody it doesn't identify with into the same huge category of other, effectively reducing the world into a big us and them. So you can think of this us-other labeling as a big part of the process of colonization. And although categories like the West and the East are now more of an outdated and less applicable to our world today, the fact that they were considered meaningful categories in previous eras still affects our current moment. Another key scholar for postcolonial theory is Frantz Fanon, a writer and psychiatrist from Martinique, a French colony in the Caribbean. Fanon believed literature can have a role in shaping politics and culture, as well as altering how people view themselves in their history. Fanon's work actually comes about 10 years before Said's, but I mentioned Said first because he was roughly more concerned with the process of colonization, while Fanon was roughly more concerned with the effects of the process. So here's a helpful quote from C.L. Innes, 2007, in the British Introduction of Postcolonial Literatures in English. Fanon asserts that in order to justify the rule and occupation of the native's territory, settlers and administrators classify the world of the native as the opposite of everything the European supposedly represents: civilization, morality, cleanliness, law and order, wholesome masculinity. So the native is, by definition, civilized or barbaric, childlike, feminine, unable to rule, and superstitious. He is deemed to have no historical monuments, no literature, and hence no history. Page 8. Do you see what Fanon is saying about how the us uses the other to define itself? These negative associations attached to other groups carry serious real-world consequences. Fanon himself focused on and explored the psychological consequences of colonization. What's important about this label of other is that people and groups who are given this label have less power than those who do the labeling. The other person or group does not hold the power to define itself. Rather, the other person or group is simply defined by the West as the opposite of us, so it never gets to have an identity that's separate from the West. The uneven power relationship between us and other generally sets up whoever is labeled as other to be controlled, exploited, and oppressed. This is often the name of helping, emphasis on air quotes, because the other is usually seen as lacking knowledge and civilization. So Western colonial powers come in and teach the other their idea of what it means to be civilized. Of course, Edward Said would be quick to point out that often the West is not willing to recognize any definition of what it means to be civilized except for their own. Thus, because an other group does not have the same way of life as the West, then that group must be taught how to live. So, postcolonial theory looks at this process of labeling, how it begins, how it's maintained and justified, what consequences it carries, how it distributes power, and so on. Poco theory also looks at the relationship between people labeled as other and the people who are doing the labeling. It looks at colonial relationships, the relationships between the colonizer and the colonized. And by the way, postcolonial theory also looks at resistance to colonization and how people can say, nope, nice try, I'm going to define myself, thank you very much. Another key aspect of Poco theory is the idea of literature as mediation. There are obviously many different opinions about what literature can and should do in the world. And here's roughly where Poco theory falls. Postcolonial theory generally depicts the lingering effects of colonization. These can include problems with national identity and unity, cultural and social strain, civil unrest and even war, and economic challenges. People who are far removed from these effects can have a harder time developing a nuanced understanding of them. As many folks can attest, conversations about cultural differences are not always easy to have. So literature can become a sort of meeting place for these conversations. By depicting these effects, literature has a purpose beyond entertaining and educating. It becomes a space for cultural mediation. It can comment on current understandings of history and advocate for new understandings. Literature can argue for changes in thought and action. It can negotiate and reconcile different perspectives. This is mediation. As we move through the readings this term, think about how the literature may be working on that level. These are the sort of questions to ask when applying postcolonial analysis. What does the text help us understand about colonial process or colonial dynamics? What person or group is othered in the text or identified as foreign, and how are they treated? What does the text reveal about the effects of identity during and after colonization? How does the text depict aspects of colonial oppression, even if it's not a literal depiction? What are the power dynamics in the text, and how are groups empowered or disempowered? Does the text reinforce or resist colonial ideologies? As we progress through the term with these concepts, we'll have the opportunity to explore the viewpoints of colonizing forces as well as groups who were or are colonized. All of this is meant to contribute to our overarching goal, to expand our understanding of the world today. And just so you know, these questions are adapted from Purdue OWL. The last thing I'd like to show you is a list of postcolonial themes. Everything we've covered in this video so far is going to become clearer and clearer as we apply it to specific works of literature. For your first analysis assignment later on, you're going to be asked to narrow your focus to specific themes, and this is the list you'll be choosing from. I don't want to overwhelm you with too many themes here, but I do want you to see the variety of options available to you. Also, this is by no means an exhaustive list of all the colonial themes, just a collection you'll take up as a group. Please notice that civilized and uncivilized are in scare quotes, since those aren't automatically objective labels. That is, different cultures have different ideas of the words civilized and uncivilized and how they should be defined. So a list of they're here. As a final note, one of the resources included in our course materials is the Postcolonial Themes Cheat Sheet, which has more specific info about each of these themes. So be sure to give that a look as well. And, there you go. So thank you for stopping in. And here's a list of a few of our references. And as always, Karen Kaiser was instrumental in all of the content for this video. And we will be thanking her many a times throughout this term and videos.